The mistress made the slave undress in front of 6 guests to show why he was so expensive. The room went silent when the mistress gave the order. 6 wealthy guests sat around the long wooden table, their eyes fixed on the young man standing near the fireplace. He was calm, but his hands were tight at his sides. The candles flickered. Outside, the wind moved through the tall grass of the plantation. "Show them," she said softly. No one knew whether she meant to shame him or to prove something greater. What happened that night did not only change his life, it changed hers forever. Tonight's story takes us back to the 1800s, in the Deep South, where large plantations ruled the land and silence carried heavy secrets. At the center of it all is a woman trapped in a loveless marriage and a young man whose strength was spoken about in whispers. Their lives were not meant to cross in any meaningful way, but fate has its own plans. If you enjoy powerful stories like this, make sure to like and subscribe. The year was 1858. The Carter plantation stood wide and proud under the hot summer sun. Cotton fields stretched farther than the eye could see. Inside the grand White House lived Mistress Eleanor Carter, wife of Harold Carter, a man known more for his wealth than his kindness. Eleanor was not old, yet her eyes often looked tired. Her husband traveled often, buying and selling land, crops, and people as if they were simple goods. The house was always full of guests, laughter, and music, but never warmth. Among the workers was a young man named Samuel. He was strong, taller than most, with quiet eyes that noticed everything. He had been bought at a high price just months before. People whispered about it. Why would Harold Carter pay so much? Eleanor had noticed Samuel from the first day. Not just his strength, but the way he carried himself, with dignity, even in chains of duty. Now, 6 guests were coming for dinner. Wealthy neighbors, curious men, and Eleanor had decided she would answer their question herself. Dinner was prepared with care that evening. Silver plates shone under candlelight. Soft music floated through the hall. The 6 guests arrived dressed in fine coats, their laughter loud and proud. They spoke of crops, money, and new purchases. Soon, the talk turned to Samuel. "I heard you paid nearly double for that young man," one guest said, swirling his drink. "He must be something special." Harold Carter smiled with pride. "Strong as 2 men," he replied. "Works without complaint." Eleanor listened quietly. She watched the way they spoke about Samuel as if he were a horse or a tool. Something inside her tightened. Samuel entered the room to refill glasses. His movements were calm, careful. He avoided eye contact, yet he felt their stares. He could sense the weight of their curiosity. One of the guests leaned forward. "Let us see why he was worth so much." There was laughter. Harold seemed ready to turn it into a joke. But Eleanor stood up slowly. Her voice was steady. "If you wish to know why he was expensive," she said, "then I will show you." The room fell silent. The night had just begun. The candles flickered as Eleanor stepped closer to the center of the room. The guests watched her with curious smiles, thinking this was nothing more than a bold moment of pride from a plantation wife. Samuel stood near the fireplace. He did not move. He did not speak, but his heart was beating hard against his chest. Harold gave a short laugh. "Eleanor, there is no need for drama." But she did not look at her husband. Her eyes were fixed on Samuel. "Step forward," she said gently. Samuel obeyed. He walked to the open space in the middle of the room. The wooden floor creaked under his boots. The 6 men leaned back in their chairs, amused and eager. One of them whispered, "Let us see what makes him worth so much coin." Eleanor paused for a moment. In that pause, the air felt heavy. She could hear her own breathing. She could feel Samuel's fear, though he tried to hide it. "Remove your shirt," she said softly. The words were not sharp. They were not cruel, but they carried weight. Samuel hesitated only for a second. Slowly, he untied the simple buttons of his worn shirt. He pulled it over his head and lowered his arms. His back and shoulders were strong, shaped by years of hard work in the fields. The men nodded. "Impressive," one of them muttered. But Eleanor was not finished. "Turn around," she said. Samuel turned. Gasps filled the room. Across his back were deep scars. Old marks, long and raised. Lines that told stories of pain no one in that room had lived through. The strength they admired was built through suffering. The guests shifted in their seats. Their smiles faded. Harold's face grew stiff. "That is enough," he said quickly. "He is valuable because he endures." Eleanor finally looked at her husband. "No," she replied quietly. "He is valuable because he survives." The room went still again. One of the men cleared his throat. "Mistress Carter, surely this display—" "This display," she interrupted gently, "is the truth." She walked closer to Samuel. She did not touch him, but she stood beside him. "You see strength," she said to the guests. "You see muscle. You see a price. But what you are truly seeing is a man who has carried pain and still stands straight." Samuel's eyes lifted slightly. For the first time that night, he looked at her. There was confusion in his gaze, but also something else, something like respect. Harold stood up from his chair. "Eleanor, this is not proper." "What is not proper?" she asked calmly. "That I show them what they paid to admire?" Her voice did not shake. It was steady, clear. "You all speak of him like he is an object," she continued. "But look carefully. He breathes. He feels. He remembers." The guests no longer looked amused. They looked uncomfortable. One of them stood. "We did not come for a lecture." "No," Eleanor said. "You came for entertainment." She turned back to Samuel. "Put your shirt on," she said softly. He did so quickly, his hand steady now. The silence in the room felt different. Not curious. Not playful. Heavy. Harold's jaw tightened. "You embarrass this household." Eleanor met his eyes. "No," she said. "I reveal it." There was a long pause. Finally, one by one, the guests began to gather their coats. Their voices were low now. The mood of the dinner had changed completely. Within minutes, the grand dining hall was nearly empty. Only Eleanor, Harold, and Samuel remained. Harold stepped closer to his wife. "You forget your place," he said in a low voice. "And you forget his," she replied. Samuel stood still, unsure whether to leave. Eleanor turned to him gently. "You may go." He nodded once and walked out of the room, his mind racing. No one had ever spoken for him like that. No one had ever seen him as more than labor. When the door closed behind him, Eleanor finally let out a slow breath. Harold stared at her as if he no longer recognized the woman he married. "You risk everything for him?" he asked. She did not answer right away. Instead, she looked toward the doorway where Samuel had disappeared. And in that quiet moment, something changed inside her. What had begun as a bold act to silence gossip had become something deeper, something dangerous. The night that was meant to show a price had revealed something far more powerful, and none of them would ever be the same. The house felt different after that night. The laughter that once filled the dining hall did not return. The servants moved more quietly. Even the wind outside seemed softer, as if it too understood that something had shifted. Harold Carter did not speak to his wife the next morning. He left early, riding out to inspect the fields, his anger clear in the tight way he held the reins of his horse. Word of the dinner had already begun to travel. On plantations like his, news moved fast. Eleanor stood by her bedroom window, watching the fields in the distance. She could see the small figures of workers bending under the sun. Somewhere among them was Samuel. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of the world she lived in. Not as a protected wife, but as someone who had chosen to step outside the quiet rules. Later that afternoon, she walked toward the fields. The overseer looked surprised to see her there. "Mistress, is something wrong?" "I wish to speak with Samuel," she said calmly. The overseer hesitated but nodded. Samuel approached, sweat on his forehead, his shirt clinging to his back. He stopped a few feet away from her. His posture was respectful, careful. "You wish to see me, ma'am?" Eleanor studied his face. In the daylight, he looked younger than she remembered. The scars from the night before were hidden again beneath cloth, but she knew they were there. "I owe you an apology," she said softly. Samuel looked confused. "You owe me nothing. I placed you in a difficult position." He paused before answering. "You spoke truth." Those 3 words stayed between them. Eleanor felt something rise in her chest, something warm and painful at the same time. "It was not bravery," she said quietly. "It was anger." "Even anger can carry truth," Samuel replied. She noticed the calm in his voice. There was no bitterness in it, only quiet strength. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of wind moving through cotton plants filled the space. "I never asked to be part of their show," Samuel continued gently. "But for the first time, someone did not look at me like I was only hands and muscle." Eleanor swallowed. "You are more than that." Their eyes met. In that simple moment, something passed between them. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. But it was real. Footsteps approached behind them. Harold. His expression was cold. "This is not proper," he said firmly. Eleanor straightened. "I am speaking." "With him?" Harold's tone carried sharp disbelief. Samuel lowered his gaze, stepping back slightly. "You forget who you are," Harold said to his wife. "And you forget who he is," she replied. Harold's face hardened. "He is property." The word hung in the air like a heavy stone. Eleanor felt a quiet fire rise in her chest. "He is Emmanuel." Silence fell over the field. Even the overseer shifted uncomfortably. Harold looked at Samuel. "Return to work." Samuel obeyed without a word. Harold turned back to Eleanor. "Your behavior invites trouble. The neighbors are already speaking. They question my authority." "Your authority?" she asked softly. "Or your conscience?" His jaw tightened. "You will not go near him again." Eleanor did not answer. That evening, the house felt colder. Harold barely touched his dinner. Eleanor sat across from him, her thoughts far away. Upstairs, in the quiet of her room, she lit a small candle and sat alone. Her heart was restless. She had crossed a line that could not be erased. Down in the quarters, Samuel lay awake as well. He stared at the wooden ceiling above him, replaying her words. "He is a man." No one had said that so clearly before. The next few days passed in silence. But silence on a plantation was never peaceful. It was tense, watchful. Whispers grew among the workers. Some said the mistress had changed. Others feared what that change might bring. On the 4th night after the dinner, a storm rolled in. Thunder cracked across the sky. Rain hit the roof in heavy sheets. Eleanor stood by her window again, unable to sleep. Across the yard, she saw movement. A shadow running through the rain. Moments later, a soft knock came at the back door. Her heart began to race. It was Samuel, soaked from the storm, breathing hard. "There is talk," he said quietly. "Your husband plans to sell me." The words hit her like the thunder outside. "Sell you?" she whispered. "He believes distance will end the trouble." Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath her. The act that began as truth had now become a threat. If Samuel was sold, he would disappear into another life of unknown hardship. Perhaps worse. The storm outside grew louder. And for the first time, Eleanor understood that her choice that night was not just a statement. It was a beginning that now demanded something greater than words. The storm did not calm that night. Thunder rolled again and again, as if the sky itself refused to rest. Eleanor stood in the dim light of the kitchen, staring at Samuel. Rainwater dripped from his sleeves onto the wooden floor. "When?" she asked softly. In 2 days, he replied. A trader is coming from the south. 2 days. It felt like no time at all. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The house above them was quiet. Harold was asleep, unaware that the very thing he feared, secrets, was now unfolding under his roof. You should not be here, Eleanor whispered. I know, Samuel said, but I thought you should hear it from me. His voice was steady, but she could see the pain behind it. He had been sold before. He knew what it meant. New land, new rules, new suffering. Eleanor felt something inside her break open. This is my fault, she said. Samuel shook his head. No, the system was here long before either of us. His words were simple, but they carried truth. She stepped closer. Not too close, just enough to lower her voice. If you leave, she said slowly, I will not forgive myself. Samuel looked at her carefully. You cannot stop him. The storm roared outside again. Eleanor lifted her chin. Maybe I can. The next morning, she did something no one expected. She went into Harold's office while he was away inspecting the barns. She opened his locked drawer using a small key she had once found by accident. Inside were papers, property records, letters, agreements. And there it was, the bill of sale for Samuel. She held it in her hands. A single sheet that reduced a life into numbers and signatures. Her heart pounded. When Harold returned that afternoon, she was waiting in the sitting room. We need to talk, she said calmly. He noticed something in her tone. Something firm. What now? He asked. You cannot sell him. His eyes narrowed. It is already arranged. I will pay you. He laughed softly. With what? With my inheritance. That made him pause. Eleanor's family had money. It was placed in her name when her father passed. Harold had never needed it before. His pride kept him from asking. You would waste your inheritance on him? He asked. I would use it, she replied, for something that matters. The silence stretched between them. You embarrass me in front of my peers, Harold said slowly. Now you challenge me in my own home. I am not challenging you, she said quietly. I am choosing. His face hardened. Choosing what? Humanity. The word hung in the air. Harold looked at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time. The gentle, quiet wife he married was no longer standing in front of him. After a long pause, he spoke. You may buy his freedom, he said. But once you do, he leaves this land. Immediately. Eleanor swallowed. Agreed. The deal was made that evening. 2 days later, instead of a trader arriving with chains, Samuel stood in the front yard with a folded document in his hands. Freedom papers. The other workers watched from a distance. Some with hope, some with fear. Eleanor stepped forward. You are free, she said softly. Samuel looked down at the paper, then back at her. His eyes were filled with emotion he struggled to contain. I do not know how to thank you, he said. You do not owe me thanks, she replied. You owe yourself a life. He hesitated. Will you be safe? He asked gently. She gave a small, sad smile. I will be fine. They both knew that was not entirely true. Her marriage would never be the same. The whispers would grow louder. But something inside her felt lighter. Samuel stepped closer, careful not to break the invisible lines society had drawn. You once said I am a man, he said. Today, you proved you are stronger than most. Her eyes filled, but she did not let the tears fall. Go, she whispered. He nodded. With one last look at the house, Samuel turned and began walking down the long dirt road that stretched beyond the cotton fields. Each step carried him farther from chains. Eleanor stood there until he was no longer visible. Behind her, the grand house felt smaller than it ever had. But for the first time in years, she felt larger. She had lost comforts. She had lost peace in her marriage. But she had gained something deeper. and that could never be taken from her. Years passed. The Carter plantation no longer held the same shine it once did. Harold became quieter, more distant, and the grand dinner slowly stopped. The house still stood tall, but something inside it had changed forever. Eleanor spent more time alone, reading by the window that overlooked the long dirt road. Sometimes, when the sun began to set and the sky turned soft orange, she would think about that stormy night, and the young man who walked away with freedom in his hands. Far from that land, Samuel built a new life. It was not easy. Freedom did not erase hardship, but it gave him choice. And choice is a powerful thing. He never forgot the woman who stood beside him when others only stared at his scars. And Eleanor never forgot the moment she chose to see a man instead of a price. That dinner was meant to prove why he was expensive. Instead, it revealed something far greater. It revealed courage. And sometimes, courage is the most valuable thing of all.